Hello from the Magma Partners office in Santiago, Chile, where I'm currently watching the sun go down across Santiago from our 17th floor office. Welcome to Crossing Borders with Nathan Lustig, where I have conversations with people doing business across borders and the people who support them, with a focus on people who have some connection to Latin America. My guest today is Amir Salihefendic, founder of Doist, a fully remote, fully bootstrapped company that created Todoist and Twist, productivity tools with more than 10 million users worldwide. Amir truly lives up to the name of this podcast. He's lived crossing borders since his early childhood, where he moved from Bosnia to Denmark, where he was the only immigrant in his class. After growing up in Scandinavia and starting university as a computer science major, he dropped out of school just before co-founding Plurk, a Twitter competitor that had millions of users in it from the first few months of launching. Amir has always been remote first. He didn't even meet his other co-founders in person, who are from North America and Asia, until 2 years into starting Plurk. After leaving the company, Amir went back to Bosnia and took what he learned and decided to start another tech company, with which he applied to start up Chile, where we met each other. After a few months in Chile, he realized that his new idea wasn't going to scale, and he remembered his side project, Todoist, which had just enough paying users to pay server costs. Once he looked at the numbers, he realized it might be a real business, and as they say, the rest is history, as they've grown Amir's former tiny side project into a massive, profitable business with more than 50 employees in 20 countries. We talk about the lessons he's learned from being remote first, bootstrapping a company, taking venture capital in Plurk, and how Amir thinks about the future of work. I hope you enjoy our conversation. Hello, Amir. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Nate. Awesome to be here.
Yeah, no, it's great that we can make this work. I think it's going to be fun.
Yeah, looking forward for this.
So, where are you in the world today?
I am in maybe Spain or Catalonia, depending on who you ask. I'm in Barcelona right now. Yeah.
Very nice. And how long have you been living in Barcelona?
For about a year now. Yeah, I moved here with my wife, from Porto, about a year ago.
And what do you think of Barcelona so far?
I think it's a fantastic city. Yeah, one of the best I have actually lived in. So we are quite happy here.
So you mentioned one of the best you've lived in. You've lived in a lot of places. Can you talk about some of the places that you've lived in and how you ended up moving around as much as you have?
Sure. So I was born in Bosnia, and due to the war, we moved to Denmark. So I basically spent my childhood in Denmark. And then I kind of had a random project in Taiwan. So I lived in Taiwan for about a year and a half. And then, I moved to Chile, where I met you and a lot of people. Yeah, and after that, I moved with my wife to Porto in Portugal and now in Spain. So I've been around. Yeah, probably need to visit the US or live in the US next, or maybe
it's one of the last somewhere in Africa or somewhere in the US?
Yeah. Maybe Africa, South Africa could be cool.
That could be a good one, yeah. So what are you working on these days? What's your main business you're working on?
Yeah, I mean, it's basically something I have worked for maybe 10 years now or more. And, it's only after Startup Chile that they actually evolved into this company called Doist. And we basically do productivity software, try to optimize the life of people and make it a bit calmer, a bit better. And we are a remote first company, about 53 people right now spread around the world. And we basically, work on two products called Todoist and Twist. Todoist is a task management app and Twist is a team communication app. So that's about it, the overview.
And how many people more or less are using your products right now or each month?
Well, you can have a vanity metric or the real metric. So I think a vanity metric is 10 million signups and real metric is over 1 million. Yeah. So more or less.
That's really good. And you guys, one of the most interesting things about Doist is that you're one, fully remote, and two, fully bootstrapped. Can you talk a little bit about what that's like and why you decided to go that route?
Sure. Actually, my first company, it was VC funded. At least we burned through millions of dollars building a company that didn't really had a business model. And I was like very frustrated about that. And I think like we made a lot of bad choices. In the end, like we probably killed our product. And yeah, I mean, it was just very frustrating. So that's why I kind of like wanted to go this bootstrap route and just build something that kind of had a business model from the get-go and weren't focused on like, getting eyeballs and, just like basic business sense from the get-go instead of like trying to build it afterwards. Yeah.
And so what were some of the biggest takeaways? You said, you thought that maybe you killed the product by taking the money and some of the decisions you made. What were some of the biggest lessons you learned from the first experience with the last company that led you to making better decisions today?
So basically, like the notion that you basically can like, bolt on a business model later on is like very false, and it's actually very hard to do. So if you first, build a product that does not really have a business model, and then you kind of like try to bolt it on, you will actually have a lot of challenges. So I think it's much better to actually build a product and build a business model alongside instead of like adding it in the end. And a lot of like VC companies, they optimize towards growth. So basically, like you don't really care about the revenues or like profitability in the beginning. You just burn money and try to attract users in hopes that you can later on monetize them. But this, at least for us, was like a huge challenge, and we could never really like build a proper business model out of this. And then the problem is like you need to raise more money, and if you can't raise money, it basically means the end of your company. So I think like the current model is kind of like very like I don't really think it's very good for either the users or like the companies that are doing this.
Yeah, it's not very sustainable, and you depend fully on someone else writing you a check rather than the fact that your product is actually good and it can be self-sustainable.
Exactly, yeah. So I think maybe, I'm not actually that anti-VC. I just like anti-funding. I think it should just be used like as a help instead of like the only source that you have.
No, that makes good sense. Well, I think we can jump back to the business side in a little bit, but I wanted to jump to your move from Bosnia to Denmark. How old were you when you made the jump?
I was like 5 years old, I think, maybe a bit more, 5, 6, yeah.
And how much do you remember about making the move?
Oh, I don't remember actually that much. I think like probably my mind has kind of blocked most of the stuff. Yeah, so I don't really like. The thing is, we crossed almost the whole Europe in a train, and I can't really remember that. But my parents have and like siblings have told me that was quite stressful, and like especially because we didn't really have like proper passports or proper visas to actually cross Europe. Yeah.
And what was it like being an immigrant as a young person in Denmark?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think, as a kid, I think actually kids have a much easier time to like integrate into a society. So for me personally, it wasn't really very hard to do this. But I think there's like a lot of challenges, and especially for my siblings, it was very hard to actually integrate into the society. Yeah, and of course, like learning the language, like Danish is probably one of the toughest languages you can actually learn. And like the whole thing, and I mean, for instance, like when in the school that I went into Denmark, I was the only foreigner on the whole school.
Wow.
Yeah, so imagine that, like you're just like in a small Danish city, and like you're the only foreigner there. Yeah, but still, I think like probably Denmark is one of the more inviting countries. Yeah, at least there were some tough times, but I think overall it was kind of a good experience. I learned a lot there.
What kind of things did you learn growing up there?
I think like especially like Scandinavia has a very interesting way of living and working, and just like life philosophy. I think it's very unique. Like to all the places I actually lived and worked, I think actually that's probably the most special one. So I probably got like a lot of the values that we actually promote in Doist are kind of like very Scandinavian values, such as, trusting people, believing the best in people. Like if you go to some other cultures, like, there's not much trust or like belief in the good of people. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that must have been a bit of a rude awakening going to Startup Chile and sort of seeing that Chile especially, but many parts of Latin America, it's sort of the opposite where you sort of assume that people are not necessarily in their have their your best interests in mind.
Exactly. And I think like, Chile isn't really, I think like Scandinavia is just the exception to this. Um, so, and even like the way that the Scandinavians, like their work-life balance is also something to be envied because they kind of like work at least hours and they are some of the most productive countries in the world. Yeah. So I think probably also like a lot of other countries could probably like get some inspiration there. Uh, so at least for me, like it influenced a lot of my thinking and just like living.
So if you could take some of the top couple things from Scandinavia and if you were able to propose changes to either, Chile or the US or another country somewhere, what would be some of the top couple things that you would think should be emulated from the Scandinavian countries?
Of I think there's quite some. I mean, first of all, I think like a work-life balance is very important, and actually like working, 60 hours or 80 hours per week does not necessarily make you like more productive. So maybe it's better to work like 37 like they do in most of the Scandinavia and, focus on like working smarter than harder. I know it's a kind of like cliche, but like if you actually look at the data, that's how they actually do this. So they don't work many hours, but the hours that people work is kind of like very productive. Um, yeah, so that's the first thing. And the second thing is also maybe like building a society based on trust and like, helping others. So like if you look at how their education system works, healthcare system works, like it works like very, very good. And I think especially something like Chile and the US could actually get inspired by this a lot because I mean, I know at least like I don't know much about the US system, but in Chile, like the healthcare is kind of a joke and same is education. So it's only like for the rich that have access to these, which is a bit sad. Yeah. And maybe the third could be like the notion of design. And I think like a lot of the stuff, I mean, if you, for instance, like visit Iceland, design thinking is kind of spread everywhere. And I think it probably creates like better societies.
No, that's interesting. I think those definitely would be, can imagine a Chile or a US where you have those types of values being at the forefront. I think it sounds a lot nicer.
Yeah, definitely. And, I think like, with automatization, AI and stuff like that, I mean, we really need to tackle these issues head on and we need to handle them very fast. And I think actually the Scandinavian model could probably be an inspiration for how you could actually build societies in the future.
That's interesting. So, what do you think? What do you see in the next little bit here with automation and technology? We have a lot of nationalist slash people wanting to go back to a previous point in time in both Europe and in the US. And from my perspective, that's never going to work. You need to figure out a new model forward rather than going back. You can't sort of put the genie back in the bottle. So, what's your thoughts on how the world might look going forward and how fast things might change? And you mentioned some of the ideas that we could take from Scandinavian societies, but do you have any other ideas on what that might look like or things that might help?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very tough, and I'm actually unsure what the best solution is. I can only like see huge problems in like, and already you can see this now, like with wealth distribution. Like as we build like these smarter systems, kind of most of the wealth actually go to a few people, and these people they are not really like that interested in helping out others. So maybe like just figuring out like how can we actually distribute wealth in societies because like with more automation, I think this will be even a bigger issue. Yeah, and maybe. Yeah, I mean, it's a very tough, tough subject.
Yeah, I think it's really hard, and it's interesting. I've been reading a lot about this stuff for a while now, and I think, have you heard of a book called Who Owns the Future?
No, no, I haven't.
You probably enjoy it. It's by a guy named Jaron Lanier or Lanier. I'm not really sure how to say his last name, but he's the guy who invented the term virtual reality in the 80s. And he talks about how exactly what you're talking about, where most industries went from being a bell curve distribution with lots and lots of different people making money from them, to now we're in a winner take all or winner take most economy. And he has some ideas of where we've gone wrong and where we might be able to fix it. It's kind of interesting.
I will definitely add that to my reading list, Nate. Yeah. I mean, just like, I think like one of the most exciting thing about these remote first companies that I see, and we are like a remote first company, is basically that we can actually help out distributing wealth and enabling like great jobs anywhere. So I think like that's maybe something like maybe remote first could be like part of the solution as well. Because like right now, if you look at the world, like, if you really want a great job, you kind of like need to live like a great tech job. You kind of need to live like in a hub, such as London or San Francisco, whatever. And with remote first, you can actually do the same thing, and you can live in Africa or India or China, whatever.
So give me the vision for remote first. And you talked a little bit about you can do a great job from anywhere rather than having to go to a city that maybe is really expensive or quality of life isn't what you want or it's away from your family and friends. But why remote first, and what are some of the benefits?
Sure. So I think like there's both benefits on like the employer side and the employee side. So like from the employer side, you kind of have access to the whole world. Like I think we hire from like 23 different countries. And this means that you can, get access to amazing talent, and you can actually also save a lot of money doing this because you don't need to compete in San Francisco or whatever place you have. This also means that you can kind of like start companies from anywhere. So for instance, like you could be in Chile and have like a huge company and hire amazing people. And I think like in the past, you couldn't really do that. Actually, like one of the reasons why we started to hire remotely was because we couldn't really find the talent that we needed, like tech talent that we needed in Santiago. So that's the first thing. And the second thing from the employee side is, people have a lot of freedom. So you can kind of like live wherever you want. And some of our employees, they travel the world around. And some others, they are just like with their friends and family on some remote island like of Greece or Spain that, they have lived there for the past 500 years or so. So I think like there's like both pros on like employer side and employee side, and they are significant.
Yeah, I think that being able to get the best talent from the entire world rather than just a city is really powerful. And the other piece that I think is interesting is that you can more likely get a better idea of when product will ship and certainty in a schedule when you have a team that's not all necessarily in a San Francisco or New York, because likely you'll have lower turnover than you would in a place where there's going to be lots of people jumping around from company to company. I don't know if you have that in Doist, but can you talk a little bit about employees and the kind of commitment they have to the company compared to maybe in San Francisco, where the average Google engineer only stays for 1.8 years, and Facebook is 1.8 years and Google is 1.1. Do you see benefits to the remote first model in employee loyalty as well?
I mean, we can definitely see that. Like I think our retention is kind of like 93% right now. Like we actually have in the last 5 years only like 3 people leave us like voluntarily. And I think this kind of like speaks of the environment you can actually build with the remote first structure. So I don't think like it's the only reason is that people can't jump to other companies. I think it's just because like people are very happy and they don't really want to change. Yeah.
So I'm going to jump back to your story. So you're going through school in Denmark. You're growing up as the only foreigner in a school. Learning the local language, which is really hard. And so, what did you do after grade school? Where'd you go?
Actually, like I didn't like I was doing university and I actually like quit or like I dropped out. That that's the common theme. And my family was kind of like they thought I was insane because I was actually finishing out my master's degree and I kind of quit. I think maybe 6 months before I finished it. Um,
And what were you studying?
Computer science.
And so why did you drop out 6 months before finishing?
Well, I started this in a social network, and it kind of like began to grow a lot. So I was just like spending all my time doing this social network, and at some point, like I couldn't really, like going into and like my university, it was like hardcore computer science, so it was basically just math. I couldn't like really get motivated to know, to go into like logic and stuff like that while I had like a burning ship I needed to fix.
And what was the social network called, and what year are we talking about, and what was it like?
So it was like in 2007, 2008. It was called Plurk. I'm not sure if you know it. So basically, like, we were one of the competitors to Twitter in the beginning. Yeah, yeah. So that's about it. And we basically created a product for North America market, but we kind of grew a lot in Asia Pacific, especially Taiwan. So that's why I actually went and lived in Taiwan for some time.
And so what kind of growth and what kind of size are we talking about, either just in Taiwan or overall, in terms of users or people or traffic, or just so people get an idea of what we're talking about?
I mean, as I recall, like we got like millions of users in the first 6 months, and I was actually like the CTO of this, so I had no clue how to actually scale this. So yeah, and I made a shit ton of mistakes doing this as well. So it was basically like very very frustrating, and it was basically like fires, like fighting with fires all day long and all night long sometimes. Yeah. So I would say like I had a very bad experience doing that, but I learned a lot.
So where were your co-founders from?
Um, Actually, like this company was also remote first. So one of the co-founders was like a Canadian Indian, and another one was like Malaysian Chinese.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And how did you meet?
Well, we met online. Yeah.
Very
So
interesting.
yeah, and it actually like we worked for 2 years before I actually met them. So it was kind of like insane.
Yeah, and how do you build trust like that when you're starting a company with people that you've just met online and you don't meet for 2 years?
I mean, I think still like you can kind of speak with people, you can chat with people and you kind of like learn their personalities. And then also like as you work along, I think like you kind of build this trust. Yeah. So even in Doist, like there's actually a lot of people right now that I haven't met and I still trust them. So yeah, I think it's possible.
Did you have any cultural differences to overcome in with the other two co-founders? Because you have three very different backgrounds, not to mention time zones and different styles of work, I would imagine.
I think actually that's one of the beautiful parts of like remote first. I think like it's really true diversity and like we really complemented each other's skills really well. So I don't really think there's like, of course, there's like we are very very different, both in looks and like the way that we're thinking. But in the end, I think kind of we went with some good solutions. Yeah, so I think it's actually like, especially like in a very global world, it's a huge competitive advantage to be very different and to be able to kind of take input from very different cultures.
Yeah, no, I think that's really important. I mean, there's a lot of what we see in our companies that are scaling from LATAM to the world or to the US is that you end up with teams that have 5, 6, 7 different countries on them, and you come up with ideas that you wouldn't have come up with if it was just Chileans or just US or just Spanish or whatever.
Exactly. And I think even, I mean, if like in San Francisco, you can probably also hire, different cultures. But I think actually it's only one culture that you hire because, like most that live in San Francisco, they will probably have a very similar like worldview. But if you go out and like hire people from very different continents and, that live in different environments, I think that's really true diversity. And that's probably like the stuff that we should focus on.
And so going back to the company, you said you had millions of users using it within the first little bit of time from when you got started, and you didn't meet each other, the co-founders, in person for 2 years, and that you had raised some money. When did you raise money? Did you raise money at the beginning before you had all met each other, or was it after?
I mean, actually, one of the co-founders, he was quite wealthy, so he kind of like paid up for a lot of the first development. And then like once we have already scaled it, we kind of went out and searched for VC investment. Yeah. So, I mean, that was also like just a very frustrating and very, not very good experience. That's probably like why I haven't really like taken any VC funding for my current company.
Did you get money from US, Asia, Europe? Where did it come from?
We actually got it from China. Yeah.
And so you talk about it being really frustrating, and I think probably most founders find it frustrating, but especially founders that are, they don't look like what a tech startup from San Francisco looks like. Not in terms of the people, but in terms of, you have 3 founders in 3 different continents who met each other online. Or in our case with Magma companies, you've got a big office in Santiago or in Medellin or in Mexico City, and then you have a smaller office in the US. It doesn't look like the kind of model that a lot of people would normally fund. So can you talk a little bit about what that process was like and why it was frustrating?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, like, being Indian and a white guy and like a Chinese Malaysian and seeking like funding from Chinese investors, like, just that like makes it very, very difficult. So that's the first thing. And like, the language barrier was a huge thing. And I think also personally, I have actually had some experience here in Europe as well. I think like the VCs or just like funding in general, like in most non-US regions, is very underdeveloped. So they kind of like they have very hard time understanding how technology works because most of their investments are actually in non-tech companies. So I have also like a lot of friends here in Europe that have the same issue. It's like it's very, very hard to get some smart funding. But I think like the situation in Europe has improved a lot the last 10 years. Like when we actually did our raises, like it was very, very difficult. Yeah. Because like this was the time before like Facebook proven their business model. Like Twitter was still like scaling up and like people didn't really understand it. So, raising money for a social network was very difficult.
And can you talk a little bit about, so you got the money in, and then you had alluded to before that the business didn't end up working out like you had wanted to. So what happened after you raised the money? And did you keep growing? Did it slow down? What happened?
I think like one of the biggest issues we had is that we were very slow to actually make decisions, and we were very slow to actually close the funding. So this means like we spent a ton of time on actually closing this round, and this means that we kind of like got outcompeted by, for instance, Weibo in China or Twitter like in the US. And in a social network, kind of timing and growth is very important. So if somebody grows exponentially in another market, like it will be very hard to actually beat them. So basically, like we spent a ton of energy on this. We closed too fast, and actually we also had like acquisition talks as well. So we also spent a ton of time on that. So basically, we didn't really focus on the most core part, which is the product, and building a user base, growing, the company. So like most of our time was just like focused on closing deals.
And how many people were in the company by then? There's the 3 co-founders, but did you have more employees?
Yeah, I think we were about, I don't know, like it depends on which time frame, but maybe 10, 15 people.
And was it all remote still?
Yeah. this said, like
Interesting.
when I moved to Taiwan, we actually started to build an office there.
Interesting. And so, what happened as it started to not work as well? What was the decision like to say, you know what, I'm not going to keep working on this. I want to go on to the next idea to do Todoist.
Actually, for me, it was kind of like kind of like a burnout phase. Like I was just really, really like very tired and sick of all of this. So I kind of like just quit. I can like even remember uh, like the specific day when I did that. But I kind of quit, and then I actually said I will go back to Bosnia. So my plan was actually to go in and live in Bosnia for some time. And I did that, and like after 2 or 3 months, I was really, really bored. So I kind of like wanted to start something new, and that's where like Startup Chile comes into play.
And so, did you already have the idea for Todoist before going to Bosnia, or and it was sort of pinging around in your head, and you got bored and decided to do it, or was it something where you came up with it sort of on the fly?
Oh, actually, like Todoist was started before I started the social network. Yeah,
Interesting.
and actually, it wasn't even the idea I submitted to Startup Chile.
Really?
Yeah, yeah.
What did you submit to Startup Chile?
A project management solution called Doist.
Interesting. And why? So you were running two things at once. Did you have a lot of users back then with Todoist?
I think I had maybe thousands of actives, and I actually also had like a business model that kind of worked. Like people paid for the for server cost. Yeah, but I couldn't really see the potential of it. For me, it was like a side project.
And what made you come up with? How did you come up with the idea in the first place?
I mean, it's basically like a tool I wanted to use myself. I think that's the best stories. I think like when you actually make something you want to use yourself, because that's where you really like care for stuff. At least for me, like if I don't really use the product myself, I kind of find it very hard to design and do it.
And so you had the side project that you wanted for yourself. It was paying the server costs. You applied with a different idea for Startup Chile, and then you got in. Can you talk a bit about why Startup Chile? How did you hear about it, and how did you switch from the original idea to that you applied with to going after Todoist?
Sure. So actually, like I didn't really plan Startup Chile. I saw like an ad on Hacker News at some point, and then I basically went in, and like my mindset to understand it is like I'm in a small city in Bosnia of like 20,000 people. I'm very bored and probably like also burned out and like a bit depressed about the whole situation. So basically, I submit like an application for Startup Chile, and actually the whole application, like I think I wrote everything in a matter of hour or two, so I didn't really think much about it. And then I submit this, and I actually forget everything about it. So then, like I think maybe a month after, I kind of received that I'm accepted. So and I'm kind of shocked. I didn't really expect that. I think, yeah. So it wasn't very planned, and then the idea they also submitted, like it was probably a good idea, but there wasn't really anything like interesting about it. So when I went to Startup Chile, I actually started to work on this, and I actually implemented like the first version, but it didn't really get much traction. And I could also see a huge problem with it is that it was kind of like built for the desktop world, and the whole world was like moving into a mobile first world. So like changing the whole product and adopting it towards mobile would have been like a huge challenge. Um, yeah. So after like 6 months, I have deployed this. It gets some users. There's also a business model, so people are actually paying for it. But I can see that it's not really growing a lot, and I would need to make like huge changes to it. And then I'm still like running Todoist, and Todoist is actually like generating I think maybe $3,000 or $4,000 per month. So I'm kind of like thinking, why don't I just like focus on Todoist and try to like move that to maybe like be like $10,000 or $20,000? Then I can like really pay myself a great salary and like live a very comfortable life. Yeah. So that was kind of like the whole stream of thinking.
And what was the inflection point for Todoist to go from, you start working on it and you start growing it, but what was the inflection point to where it became, wow, this is for real. I can really make a business on this and I can see a path to millions of users.
That's a very that's a very good question. I don't think there's like a point in time. The thing is, like, when I actually start to focus on this full time, I can see like huge changes in like revenues, in user growth, and also actually like the first people that I hire for this project, like it's kind of like insane. Like I have no clue how I actually recruited them, but it's kind of like because I couldn't really pay a lot, like, and there was like no guarantees. So basically, some of the people, and actually they are like, I think all of them are actually still with the company today. Like they were hired on like very low salaries and like with very weird, setups. So basically, I would say like I can probably only pay salary for the first month. I have no clue like how this will go out in the future. But yeah, they still kind of like believed in it and stuck with it. So I'm very grateful for that.
That's a really interesting way that I think startups that are going to do well and end up getting traction end up able to get really good people early on strange deals or way under market because they either see something about the founder or about the business that makes them want to continue. In your case, do you think that they saw the vision that you had, or do you think it was almost just dumb luck that they were willing to jump on at the beginning?
Uh, I doubt actually anybody of these could see like a broader vision. Like even myself, like I couldn't like really see the big vision. And I have worked for many years on this, so it's kind of like yeah. And I think like I'm not sure who said this, but I think maybe Paul Graham is like maybe some of the best ideas are those ideas that kind of seem stupid for most others, because like if they were very good ideas, somebody would have done it. And like to do apps probably seems like a stupid thing that you should, like, you have thousands of to do apps, like why would you actually do a new one?
Well, so I'll ask you your same question. Why Todoist rather than the other to-do apps that were out there at the time?
I mean, that's a very good question, and I think maybe it's really like we really cared about this. Like we really use the product ourselves, and we care deeply about it. So I think that kind of like makes it very different from maybe many of the others, where you kind of like try to make a product that kind of like solves something for some user that you think might have this problem, while we actually had this problem and we kind of build a solution for it. So I think like in terms of like the quality and just like how the product is designed is probably much better than a lot of our other like competitors.
And so then recently you launched Twist, which is sort of a companion app to Todoist. Also could be used on its own. And what led to that decision? And can you describe the app as well?
Sure. So basically, like we use Slack for I think a year or two, and like Slack is an amazing product. And I'm not sure if you use Slack, but it's a really really well crafted. But a problem for us is like this model of like always online chit chatting and getting messages throughout the day. Like we don't really think it's the future model, and we actually could envision a model that kind of looked much better and that was like much more asynchronous. So this means that you kind of don't need to be online all the time. You can like respond whenever it's best for you, and like in a remote first environment where we operate across many different time zones, like having forced real-time communication is like not really a good solution. So that's where actually Twist comes in. Is like basically us. We think we can kind of like solve this in a better way that kind of like optimizes towards like work-life balance, that optimizes towards asynchronous communication, that optimizes towards the future, which we think is like remote first companies.
Yeah, for me, the bane of my existence as an investor that works with 30 something teams across different countries and time zones is the immediacy of needing to respond to a Slack or a WhatsApp or an email. And so the Twist idea of asynchronous and not getting that notification immediately is very appealing to me, and something that we've been testing out with a couple of our companies here to see if we can implement it on a more broader scale.
Well, I hope you can do it. Yeah. And, like we're still early in this, but I think it's actually the same story as Todoist. Is like basically we are solving our own problem here. Like, yeah, we'll see where it ends. But, we hope that other people will kind of feel the same way. And especially like if you look at, movements such as, deep work and time well spent and stuff like that, that we kind of like need to revolutionize how we actually work, and we need to optimize towards deep and meaningful work instead of just shallow work where you respond to messages or chit chat or like do stuff that maybe isn't that important or that doesn't really move you forward that much.
Yeah, it's very easy to work on, quote unquote, responding to email, responding to messages, rather than the most important thing for the day. And I think it's no coincidence that for me, I get a lot of my best work done either on an airplane where I don't have internet, or going to a coffee shop and turning off internet, and you can just focus on something. So I think any sort of tools that are being created to get you back into that mindset are where the future of work is going. Can you talk a little bit about what you see as the case for why the future of work is more remote? I know we talked a little bit about it before, but you've been pretty vocal on Twitter and in some of the blog posts about why you think this is something that more people should know about and more companies should be thinking about.
Sure. I mean, I think like first of all, I think it's maybe like competitive advantage. So I think actually like remote first companies have huge competitive advantages. Like one of them is based like finding amazing talent anywhere in the world. Like this is, like I think it's probably the biggest competitive advantage. The second part is maybe also like not having to compete on salaries with like Google or Facebook or some other giant that is in your neighborhood. That's maybe the second part. And third is maybe also like that we can build and optimize towards like a life quality instead of just like access to jobs. So for instance, like maybe you can be much happier living in the countryside of the US or like living maybe in Patagonia, whatever else you want to live, and living a life that you kind of design for yourself and for your family, instead of living in New York where you can afford a great apartment, maybe your kids can afford great schools and etc. So I think like those are the three components that I think will make this a very important part of the future.
And how fast do you see this change happening?
I think it's happening already right now. I mean, I think I'm not sure, there was like a science fiction writer that wrote that the future is here. It's just not evenly distributed. And I think the future is already here. And I would say like maybe in the next 5 to 10 years, a lot of companies would probably be remote first in some sense.
Yeah, I think it's a debate that I have with one of the guys who's founded another company from Startup Chile, David Lloyd from Intern Group, where they're not fully remote, but they have 12 offices around the world. He's episode 1 of the podcast if anyone wants to hear his story. But he's been talking about this stuff for 6-7 years now and believes that it's going to be about that same sort of time scale where 5 to 10 years, where it's pretty common, where you could ask any student coming out of university, and they would understand what remote first is and be something that they'd be looking for. I think it actually might end up being faster, especially if economies in the developed kind of US or Europe ever take any sort of a downturn again, which they will at some point. I think you could have a big push again towards more remote companies and remote options.
Definitely, Nate. I mean, it's always hard to predict stuff for the future. And I think actually also in the book Deep Work, I think also there's a very good argument, and it's basically based on capitalism and, just like competitive advantage. So if you have actually companies that are much more competitive than others. And, like this isn't only in terms of like remote first work, but also like able to do meaningful work. So if you have a company A that does like very deep work, solves very hard problems, really is focused on their mission or like the stuff they do. And then you have a company B that is basically like a real-time chat all day, chit-chatting, thinking in one line, being, stressed and unfocused. Like you will have company A on longer term probably win over this company that is basically unfocused and can do like deep and hard work. And if we look in the future, like a lot of the problems that face us are very, very hard. And, like you can't just fix them by thinking in one-liners. So I think that's also like a very good argument why this change will happen. And like the companies actually adopt all of these things, like they will be much better suited for the future than those that don't.
So you mentioned the book Deep Work. Do you have any other books, blogs, podcasts, documentaries, any sorts of resources that you would recommend to either people looking to work for a remote first company or a founder that's thinking about either making their company remote first or just starting their company?
Oh, that's a very good question. I mean, there's a lot of really great books, and actually like 37 Signals or Basecamp, they have like remote, which I think is a fantastic start. And then you also have like companies such as, Zapier, Buffer, and ourselves that kind of like shared a lot of like best practices on remote work and, just how to do it and stuff like that. So I think there's a lot of like both books and articles and probably podcasts as well. I don't really know any good though, like that are only focused on remote first work.
Maybe someone from Doist should do a remote first podcast. I bet it would be a hit.
Yeah, I mean, we should definitely do that. Actually, there's a team that kind of wants to do that at some point. But, like producing a podcast isn't easy, as you probably know. So,
well,
yeah.
I would argue it's easier than you think. I can give you some I can give you some tips once we get offline. But I would say the advice that someone gave me when I first started was do the first 5 episodes and don't listen to them and publish them, because your first 5 are not going to be great. And then if you listen to your first 1 or 2 before you published, you probably wouldn't ever publish the rest and you'd spend too much time doing it. But you learn so much in your first 5 that they get much, much better, much faster. And there's also podcasting editors and companies and producers that don't cost all that much, where all you need to do is record the audio and dump it over to them and they give you everything. And it's not very expensive. So I would say if you have a team that wants to do it, try it out. It's a pretty low cost investment to do well.
Well, I will definitely, take your word for it and ask you for some tips. Yeah, I think it will be fantastic to actually have like a remote first podcast. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's a niche that I don't think anyone's done. It would be great to hear.
Yeah, and hopefully it won't stay a niche for long.
Yeah. And so beyond hopefully doing a podcast coming into the future, what's next for Todoist and Twist and the rest of the company?
That is a very good question. I mean, right now we're kind of like very comfortable. We have a very good business. We control everything ourselves. But I think like what we really want to do is like we want to do bigger stuff. So we want to go out and like reach more people, build products maybe that don't target like 1 million people, but they target like tens of millions. So we are kind of like trying to figure ways of how we can actually, build products that are much grander in scale than our current stuff.
And the question that I always like to ask to all of the people on the podcast, so if you could go back to when you were just starting Todoist as a side project, knowing what you know today, what advice would you give yourself?
That's a very good question. I would probably say that I should have focused much earlier on actually Todoist, like just jump ship, faster. But I could not really see the potential in the beginning, so it was very hard to actually do that. Yeah. And another thing I think is if you actually do anything like API related or like platform related, like think it carefully through before you actually commit to implementation. And this is like a bit about development, but I think it's also just like try to design from the beginning, because like once you like reach a ton of users, making changes is very, very hard. So I would probably have loved if I could actually have spent like a year just like designing the problem model.
That's really interesting. And so where can people find more about you and Doist online?
So for Doist, I think probably our blog is the best case. So blog.doist.com. You can find it, and we have a lot of like interesting articles about remote first and why we don't have an exit strategy and stuff like that, which I think will be interesting for your listeners. And another thing is probably my Twitter account. I'm quite active there. It's Amix, AMIX 3K. Yeah. So you're also very welcome to contact me if you have any questions or reach out.
Awesome. And are you hiring currently? And where can people find a potential remote first job with Doist?
Yeah, I mean, I think we have like 10 positions right now. So it's doist.com/jobs. And, we love talented people, and we would love to hire more of those. So yeah, please go check that out. And regarding like remote first jobs, there's like a lot of job boards right now. Like I think Nomad List has one, and some other companies have others. So you can probably find only like remote first jobs on these boards.
Awesome. Well, thanks for taking the time to do this conversation in the podcast. I really enjoyed it, and I know we could talk for lots and lots more, but hopefully we get to meet up when you're in Chile and we can chat.
Yeah, definitely, Nate. It was a pleasure having you here, and I hope also people got something out of it.
No, definitely. It was really good. Thanks again for listening to this episode of Crossing Borders. If you want to learn more about remote work, Doist, and working across borders, check out episode 29, where I talk with Startup Chile co-founding team member and current head of marketing at Doist, Brenna Lowry. That's episode 29. I also wanted to say thank you to everyone who's rated and reviewed Crossing Borders on iTunes and Stitcher. And to give a special thanks this week to Kamal in Chile. Thanks again for writing a great review on iTunes. You can find past episodes on iTunes, Stitcher, and nathanlustig.com by searching Crossing Borders. Thanks again for listening, and have a great rest of your day.